The summer sun hung low over the Massachusetts countryside, painting the wooden barracks of Fort Deans in shades of gold and amber. It was August 1945, 3 months after Germany's surrender, and though the guns of Europe had fallen silent, the war lingered in the faces of those who had lived it. Inside the camp's wire fences, a group of German women worked quietly in the mess yard, their gray uniforms faded, their laughter restrained. They were prisoners of war, members of the German Women's Auxiliary Corps, radio operators, clerks, nurses, captured during the final collapse of the Reich. Their war was over, yet for many of them, peace felt stranger than battle. At the edge of the yard, Private James leaned against a wooden post, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat glistening on his forearms as he turned a long metal skewer over an open fire. On it sizzled rows of yellow corn, brushed with butter and dusted with salt. The air was thick with the scent, sweet, earthy, almost intoxicating after years of rationed rations and powdered meals. He was humming softly to himself, an old song from home, when a voice broke through the quiet. "Was ist one of the women asked. Her name was a sharp-tongued 20-year-old from Bremen with sun-bleached hair tucked beneath a fraying cap. She squinted suspiciously at the fire, her blue eyes narrowing. "Grind, corn," he said simply, turning the skewer again. The group of women exchanged puzzled glances. One of them, older and more composed, tilted her head. She said slowly, the German word falling heavy with doubt. "For animals." That earned a ripple of laughter from the others. "Animal feed," muttered, smirking. "Of course, the Americans eat like pigs." Her friends laughed harder this time, not cruelly, but with the careless bravado of people too proud to admit curiosity. Chuckled unfazed. "Animal feed, huh? Maybe you should try it before you decide." He reached for one of the charred golden ears, rolled it in a pat of butter, and held it out on the end of a fork. "Go on," he teased, "for science." Wrinkled her nose, but took it. The other women leaned in, expecting her to spit it out immediately. She didn't. Instead, she hesitated, took a tentative bite, and froze. The crack of the roasted kernels gave way to sweetness, smoke, and warmth she hadn't tasted in years. Her eyes widened. She looked up speechless, then took another bite. The laughter stopped. Watching closely, stepped forward. "It's good," she asked in disbelief. Didn't answer, her mouth was full. Laughed again and tossed another ear of corn onto the coals. "Not bad for pig food, huh?" Soon the women were all gathered around the fire, the sweet smell of butter and smoke mingling with the sound of hesitant laughter. For a few precious minutes, the war, the fences, the uniforms, all of it faded. They were just people sharing food under a summer sky. But for Captain, who observed the scene from the far side of the yard, the moment carried a deeper weight. She had spent months overseeing the camp, watching these women struggle between pride and loss. To see them laughing, eating, living, it was more than a small victory. It was proof that humanity could survive even the worst of wars. As dusk fell, fireflies began to dance around the edges of the camp. The guards relaxed. The prisoners lingered longer than usual, savoring the taste of something unfamiliar and good. Wrote in her small diary that night, "We mocked them and then we tasted. It was sweet, so sweet I almost cried." No one could have known that a simple ear of corn, dismissed as animal feed, would become the spark for something extraordinary. It was the beginning of a fragile bridge, built not from treaties or orders, but from warmth, laughter, and the quiet power of kindness shared between former enemies. By early September 1945, the air at Fort Deans had shifted. The sharpness of war was fading, replaced by something warmer, something almost ordinary. The German women prisoners had begun to move about the camp with quiet confidence, their postures less rigid, their faces softer. The routines remained: roll call, work details, inspections, but the hostility had drained away. Even the guards, many of them barely older than the prisoners themselves, no longer saw enemies behind the wire. They saw women, tired, hungry, homesick, and human. The roasted corn incident had become camp legend. "Animal feed," they now joked, laughing each time or one of the kitchen crew prepared it. The guards started calling the women the corn critics, and instead of taking offense, they laughed too. For the first time since their capture, the women were beginning to feel something they hadn't known in years: belonging. Noticed the change most of all. Once cautious and withdrawn, she now found herself speaking English with growing confidence, often mediating between the guards and other prisoners. She had been a communications specialist before her capture, fluent in radio code, adept at translation, and those skills now served her in a different kind of war, the war of understanding. One afternoon, while assisting in the kitchen, caught the smell of something frying, rich and savory. "What is that?" she asked, who was manning the stove. Cornbread, he said, pouring batter into a cast-iron skillet. Kind of like a cake, but not really. The women exchanged puzzled glances. Cornbread, Anna Weber repeated, frowning. You bake bread from corn? Grinned. Not just for animals this time. The women laughed, remembering their earlier mistake. You people will turn anything into food, teased. And good food, shot back. That's why we're still smiling. When the cornbread was ready, the Americans handed slices through the wire. The women ate cautiously, then eagerly, their laughter echoing across the compound. Even Captain, observing from her office window, smiled at the sight. It was remarkable, she thought, how something as small as food could dissolve the walls built by ideology. Later that evening sat with Anna and beneath the fatting light of the guard tower. They could hear the faint hum of a radio playing swing music from the American side. The melody was strange, playful, and full of life. Closed her eyes. It sounds like the war never happened for them, she murmured. Anna nodded. Maybe that's why they won. Didn't answer. Her thoughts were heavier. She had been reading American newspapers, aloud in small batches by Captain, and what she found inside them unsettled her. Reports of the liberation of concentration camps, of the horror uncovered there. Photographs that she could not stop seeing even after she closed her eyes. She hadn't told the others yet. She didn't know how. How could she explain that the country they had served had done things so monstrous that they imagination? That night she wrote in her diary again. They are kind, these Americans, and yet I see in their eyes that they know something we do not. I wonder what they see when they look at us. A week later, a truck arrived at the camp with supplies. Among them were crates of food, boxes of books, and a few musical instruments donated by a local church group. Captain decided to host a small gathering, part morale, part diplomacy. She asked to help organize it. We'll share songs, said, smiling. You sing something German, we'll sing something American. When the evening came, lanterns glowed softly around the yard. The Americans started with, You Are My Sunshine, their voices rough but cheerful. Then it was the German's turn, stepped forward, clutching her notebook. Her voice trembled as she began the wartime song that had once drifted from radios on both sides of the conflict. To everyone's surprise, the Americans joined in. The tune had been loved even by Allied soldiers during the war. The sound rose into the night, 2 languages, 1 melody. Guards and prisoners stood side by side, singing a song that belonged to no nation and every heart. When it ended, there was silence, then applause, laughter, even tears. Afterward handed another ear of corn, grinning. Peace offering, he said. She laughed softly. This time, she replied, I think we both win. It was a small moment in a forgotten camp, but history is often built from such moments. Laughter over a fence, shared songs in the dark, and the strange realization that kindness could travel farther than any army ever had. The chill of autumn swept through Fort Deans as October 1945 arrived. The trees around the compound blazed in shades of crimson and gold, their leaves drifting lazily down over the barbed wire fences. The war was truly over now. Across the Atlantic, Nuremberg's trials had begun, and newspapers carried grim headlines about confessions, evidence, and atrocities. Inside the camp, though, the world still felt small, still caught between memory and discovery. For each passing day brought a growing unease. She had asked Captain for permission to read the American newspapers that arrived weekly with the mail trucks. The captain, trusting her curiosity and fluency, agreed. What found within those pages shattered something inside her that words could hardly describe. She had known defeat. She had even accepted that her country had been wrong in its ambitions. But she hadn't been prepared for the truth of what Germany had done, what they had done in the name of victory and nationalism. The photographs were small and grainy, yet unbearable. Human skeletons in striped uniforms, mass graves, children staring blankly from behind fences much like the one she stood behind now. That night sat on her bunk, her diary open but her pen still. The barrack was quiet except for the soft breathing of the other women asleep around her. Across the aisle, Anna Weber lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Finally whispered, Anna, have you seen the papers? Anna turned her head. Yes, her voice cracked slightly. I thought they were lies at first, American propaganda, but Captain showed me a letter from her cousin in Europe. He was one of the soldiers who opened the camps. Closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her mouth. I didn't know, Anna. I swear I didn't know. I didn't either, Anna whispered. But now I wonder, how could we not? Over the next few days, the mood in the camp changed. Laughter faded. Even the guards seemed quieter, their usual friendly exchanges subdued. The German women gathered in small groups, talking in low voices, asking questions no one could answer. Once the loudest among them refused to speak at all. One afternoon, Captain gathered the prisoners in the main hall. She stood before them, holding a stack of photographs, official releases from the War Department documenting the liberation of Dachau, Belsen, and Buchenwald. Her tone was calm but grave. "I won't force you to look," she said, "but I believe you should see what your leaders did, what this war really was." Silence filled the room. One by one, the women approached, hesitant, trembling. When's turn came, she took a photograph in her hands and stared. It showed a line of corpses beside a railway track, their bodies contorted, their faces unrecognizable. The caption beneath read simply, "Buchenwald, April 1945. She felt the room spin around her. Her throat burned. She whispered. Captain stepped closer. These were prisoners, many were women, some were children. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the photograph. She tried to speak, but no words came. The paper shook in her hands before she finally lowered it, pressing it to her chest like a wound. That night the barracks were silent. No laughter, no conversation, only the distant sound of the wind pushing through the pines. Sat by the small window, staring out at the dim lights of the guard posts. She thought of the corn, the laughter, the songs, and how naive it all seemed now. The kindness of her captors, the ease of their smiles, their warmth, it made sense now. They had known. They had seen the worst of what Germany had done, and still, they had chosen not to treat these women with hatred. Her diary entry that evening was short, written through tears. How does one live after learning such things? I thought I served my country. Now I see I was serving something monstrous. Perhaps that is why we are here, to learn what we truly became. The next morning, the women reported for their usual duties, but something fundamental had changed. They no longer carried themselves with the stiff pride of soldiers, nor the quiet resignation of captives. They worked as if searching for redemption in every small act, scrubbing the mess hall floors, helping the medics, assisting with translations. Even noticed, "They've gone quiet," he said softly to Captain one day. "It's like the wind went out of them." Nodded, "No, Private, not out, through. Sometimes the wind has to go through before the air can clear." Winter was coming. The leaves had fallen. But beneath the grief, something else began to stir, the faint, fragile beginning of understanding. The war had taught them what it meant to hate. Now, perhaps, they were learning what it meant to forgive not others but themselves. By the time snow blanketed Fort Deans, the camp no longer felt like a prison. The women still wore their uniforms and lived behind fences, but their daily lives had transformed into something that resembled a small, self-sustaining community. The guards trusted them now, enough to let them tend gardens, repair tools, even teach English classes to new arrivals. What had once been suspicion had become a strange, cautious friendship. For Captain, it was a phenomenon she couldn't quite explain. She'd overseen other camps, all filled with bitterness, resentment, and empty eyes. But here at Fort Deans, something remarkable had happened. The German women had stopped seeing themselves as prisoners. They'd become something else, helpers, teachers, even healers. Anna Weber worked daily in the infirmary with Dr. Hayes, an American physician who'd come home from the Pacific Theater with more scars than stories. He'd been skeptical at first about taking a German assistant, but Anna's quiet competence and unshakable calm soon won him over. "You have steady hands," he told her once as they cleaned a wounded guard's bandage. "I've seen men tremble doing less." Anna smiled faintly. "I've had practice," she said, "just on different kinds of wounds." Meanwhile, had taken on the role of translator and mediator for the camp. She helped the officers manage correspondence, organized supply records, and even began teaching English to her fellow prisoners in the evenings. What began as routine administrative work soon became something deeper, a purpose she hadn't felt since before the war. The women were slowly rebuilding themselves, one act of kindness at a time. But outside their small world, the world itself was shifting. News from Germany painted a grim picture. Cities in ruins, families scattered, hunger everywhere. Each report that reached the camp seemed to tighten the same invisible cord around the women's hearts. Then one gray morning in February 1946, Captain gathered them all in the assembly hall. She stood behind a wooden podium, the hum of the old heating pipes filling the silence. "Ladies," she began, her tone gentle but solemn, "I have received official orders from Washington. Repatriation procedures for all German prisoners, including you, are to begin immediately." For a moment there was only stillness. Then the murmurs started, soft, uncertain. Some faces lit up in cautious relief, others paled. Anna's hands went cold. stomach turned to stone. Continued, within the next 2 weeks, you'll be transported to processing centers in New York, then returned to Germany. You will be given food, clothing, and temporary housing. From there, you'll be free to rebuild your lives. She paused, scanning the room. This is good news. But the room didn't feel relieved. It felt afraid. After the meeting, the women gathered in small circles, whispering. For many of them, the thought of returning to Germany wasn't homecoming, it was exile. What waited for them there? Cities reduced to rubble, families gone, a country ashamed and broken. That night, Anna sat together on their bunks, the snow outside glowing under the floodlights. I should be happy, Anna said softly. It's what we all wanted, isn't it, to go home? Shook her head slowly. But home is gone, Anna. We've seen the photographs, we've read the reports. What's left there for us? Anna looked down at her hands, the same hands that had bandaged wounds, scrubbed floors, and held the hands of dying men. Perhaps forgiveness, she said. Smiled faintly, or perhaps what we found here is forgiveness. Over the next days, something unexpected began to happen. Conversations rippled quietly through the camp, whispers of maybe we could stay. It started with a handful of women, then grew. One evening after lights out, gathered with 13 others in the dim glow of a single lantern. Captain will think we've gone mad, muttered nervously, asking to stay in captivity. It isn't captivity anymore, said softly. It hasn't been for months. We've built something here, something good, something I never thought we'd find again. Anna added, if we go back, we'll be strangers in our own country. People will see our uniforms and hate us. But here, she hesitated, here we're allowed to start over. Silence followed. No one disagreed. The next morning, asked to see Captain. The captain, busy at her desk, looked up curiously when entered, clutching her small diary. Something on your mind, miss? Yes, ma'am, took a breath. We've been talking, some of us. We'd like to request permission to stay here in America. Blinked, genuinely taken aback. You're asking not to go home. Nodded, not yet at least. Germany isn't ready for us, and maybe, she hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe we're not ready for it. The captain studied her, seeing in her face not rebellion but conviction, an earnestness that demanded respect. I'll have to send your request up the chain, finally said. It's unprecedented, to say the least. As left the office, the winter wind caught her hair, lifting it briefly in the cold sunlight. For the first time since her capture, she felt something she hadn't felt even before the war, freedom. Not the kind granted by governments, but the kind born from choice. When word spread through the camp, it caused both confusion and awe. The idea of prisoners begging to stay in the country of their former enemy was almost unthinkable. But then again, so much about Fort Deans had understanding. By the week's end, 14 women had signed their names to the petition. What began as captivity was becoming something else entirely, a chance at redemption, and the beginnings of a story that would astonish everyone who heard it. Spring arrived slowly that year, creeping across Massachusetts in tender shades of green. The last snows melted into the soil around Fort Deans, revealing muddy paths and budding trees that lined the fences. The war in Europe was a memory now, a fading ghost that lived only in photographs and scars. But inside the camp, history was still being written. The petition from and her group of 14 women reached Washington in early March. It passed through confused clerks, skeptical officers, and finally landed on the desk of Colonel Arthur Daniels, who oversaw POW repatriation for the War Department. His first reaction was disbelief. Prisoners refusing to go home. He read the report twice, then again, thinking there must be a mistake. But there it was, a clear and deliberate request from 14 German women to remain in the United States. The initial response from Washington was cautious. Officially, under the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war had to be repatriated once hostilities ended. There was no precedent for voluntary captivity, but the more Daniels read Captain's accompanying letter, the harder it was to dismiss. She wrote not as a bureaucrat, but as a witness. These women, explained, are not asking for comfort. They are asking for a chance to live with purpose. Their decision is not one of defiance, but transformation. In a camp once marked by fences, they found freedom in humility and perhaps in gratitude. While Washington deliberated, life inside Fort Deans continued in a state of hopeful suspense. The women who had signed the petition threw themselves into work. Anna spent long hours in the infirmary, treating both American soldiers and prisoners with the same quiet dedication. Assisted captain directly now, helping manage the growing influx of paperwork tied to demobilization. She no longer needed a translator. Her English was graceful, fluent, almost lyrical. At night, the women gathered around the small stove in their barracks, reading aloud from English books donated by local churches. They practiced pronunciation, shared stories, and spoke of futures that didn't yet exist but felt suddenly possible. One evening received a letter official, stamped with a Washington seal. Captain called her into the office and handed it over silently. Hands shook as she unfolded the paper. The letter was brief, written in careful, formal language. The department recognizes the exceptional circumstances of your request. Given the ongoing reconstruction of Germany and the nature of your service, consideration has been granted for temporary resettlement status under the supervision of civilian sponsors. You may remain in the United States as displaced persons, pending evaluation for permanent immigration. Looked up, her eyes wide. Does this mean we can stay? Captain smiled. It means you're not prisoners anymore. Word spread through the camp like wildfire, cried openly, laughing through her tears. Anna stood motionless, the news taking time to sink in. Others hugged, clung to one another, unable to speak. For the first time, they weren't captives or refugees. They were people with a choice. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Families from nearby towns volunteered as sponsors, many of them the same Americans who had once feared or despised their presence. Dr. Hayes offered to take Anna under his supervision at Worcester General Hospital, calling her the most capable assistant I've ever had. The Henderson family, a kind couple from a nearby church, offered to house and help her pursue work as a translator. On the morning of their release, Captain assembled everyone in the courtyard. The air was cool and bright, carrying the faint scent of pine. The American flag fluttered above them, its colors sharp against the pale sky. "You came here as prisoners," said, her voice firm but tender. "You leave here as something more, as women who found courage not in victory but in understanding. Remember that wherever you go." Stepped forward, holding her diary, the same worn leather book she'd carried since the day she was captured. "We will remember," she said softly, "because you showed us what it means to forgive." One by one, the women walked through the open gate. No guards, no fences, just sunlight and the long road ahead. Some left for homes in nearby towns, others to work placements in Boston and New York. A few, still uncertain, chose eventual repatriation to Germany. But all carried something invisible with them, the knowledge that compassion could heal wounds deeper than any bullet or bomb. For the years that followed were filled with rebuilding. She became a translator for the State Department, helping resettle displaced persons from across Europe. In time, she married the Hendersons' son, a quiet teacher named Thomas, and became a U.S. citizen. She never forgot where she had come from or the fire and the corn and the laughter that first melted her fear. Anna devoted her life to medicine. She never married, saying her purpose was already clear, to heal what war had broken. Her name appeared decades later in hospital records and charity lists, small footnotes of an extraordinary woman who once wore a uniform but chose a different kind of battle, one fought with kindness. Years later, in 1970, was invited to speak at the United Nations in New York on a panel about reconciliation and human dignity. Her hands trembled as she stood at the podium, that same leather diary resting on the stand before her. She opened it to a page written in 1945, the day of the corn fire. "We laughed at their food," she read, her voice steady. "We thought we were mocking them, but they were teaching us something we didn't understand. That peace begins when you stop seeing people as enemies and start seeing them as human." The hall was silent. Then came applause, quiet at first, then rising, echoing. When the speech ended, stepped outside into the New York evening. The city lights glittered above the Hudson, reflecting off the water like small fires. She held her diary closed, smiling through the wind. Fort Deans was long gone by then, its fences dismantled, its barracks reclaimed by the forest. But if you stood there today on that quiet patch of Massachusetts earth, you might still feel it, the warmth of that long-ago summer evening, the laughter around a fire, and the sweetness of roasted corn that once bridged the impossible distance between enemies. For them, it had never been about captivity. It had been about rediscovering what it meant to be free.